Make sure to give my dad a 5-star review.
Make sure to like and subscribe to his YouTube. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Iran plays into this because to a lot of these charismatic Christians, they believe that Iran plays a central role in this kind of final battle between good and evil. That this, a war with Iran is described in the Bible, and there's, the notion of a demon that is called the Prince of Persia, Persia being an ancient biblical times name for Iran.
Hey, welcome back, Faithful Politics listeners and viewers. I'm your political host, your faithful host, Pastor Josh Bertram. Can't be here today because he is doing pastoral things, so you've got me. But you also have Kiera Butler, who's joining us again from Mother Joan. She is the lead investigative reporter over there, and she's been covering the topic of Christian Zionism quite a bit lately. And so we brought her back on to talk about what her reporting has come up. And yeah, we're just so glad to have her back on. So welcome back to Faithful Politics, Kiera.
Thanks. I'm glad to be back.
Yeah, we are glad to have you. So let's just jump right into it. So you wrote a article. This was, I believe, early March. It was kind of right on the heels of our joint operation with Israel to bomb Iran. So let's start there. Like after the bombs fell, what was sort of the immediate reaction from the communities that you've been looking at, specifically like the religious communities?
Yeah, so it's interesting. The two religious communities that I follow most closely had exactly opposite reactions to each other. So, on the one hand, you have kind of charismatic evangelical folks who are involved in this movement called the New Apostolic Reformation that I think your listeners have probably heard a fair bit about. Those folks were largely very happy, very approving of the decision to bomb Iran, whereas the Theobros, this is a group that's more reformed in their theology, associated with Doug Wilson, who's a pastor in Moscow, Idaho, Christian nationalists, much like the New Apostolic Reformation folks are, but in a very different kind of way. Those folks were not happy. They're like non-interventionist. They, for reasons that we can get into, they didn't approve of the bombing, and they didn't see really any religious significance to it.
That is pretty wild, because like whenever we think of like Christian nationalism specifically, we always think about like, the merging of kind of Christian identity, American identity. And each of those identities, I think, are kind of anchored on some principle. Like diehard Christian nationalists are, Bible, Constitution, our king, and then you may have others where it's like maybe the Constitution is above the Bible, but they're still kind of closely connected. Like, are you seeing kind of like the differences be more connected to like theology, or more just like an interventionist political type of reason?
It's such an interesting question. And, I don't think there's really an easy, clear-cut answer, or I guess even more importantly, an answer that would apply to every last one of them. I think that it's important to keep in mind that these are movements, yes, but there are also still individuals in the movements. And I think some of them are more theologically motivated and some of them are more politically motivated, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Are like Christian Zionists playing a role here in kind of quarterbacking what the sort of Republican or Christian message is on the war?
Yes. So Christian Zionism is a big part. It's almost like impossible to overstate how important Israel is to folks who are in this kind of evangelical charismatic world, the New Apostolic Reformation folks. This is a group for whom Israel is an extremely meaningful entity, biblically, theologically. Basically, Christian Zionists believe that in order to usher in the second coming of Jesus, Israel needs to be kind of restored, and the Jewish people need to return to Israel. There needs to be a third temple built. There's a whole kind of sequence of events that these folks believe are part of biblical prophecy and that need to occur in order for Jesus to come back and for, us all to live happily ever after.
I think, and don't quote me on this. This is why I have Josh to talk about the religious stuff. But I believe it's called something called like premillennialism, dispensationalism.
Oh, look at you! Yeah.
I know. But based on what I think I know about it is, this idea that we have to do a bunch of stuff before Jesus' return. There's a really great book called American Apocalypse by Matt Avery Sutton, who just wrote another book called Chosen Land. But American Apocalypse goes all into like this premillennialism, dispensationalism. Now I'm just going to keep saying that over and over again.
It's kind of fun to say.
It is kind of fun. It just rolls right off the tongue. but his sort of idea in the book is like, this is like a theology that was sort of imported to the United States, I believe it's like the late 1800s or something, where, Christians, in order to, fulfill kind of the mission of God, has to do stuff. And the stuff part is the thing I'm really unsure of. So like based on your understanding of Christian Zionism, like, are there things that have to be done, and like kind of where does sort of Iran fit into the larger picture?
Right. So I think just to back up a beat, there's this guy, the scholar Matt Taylor, who is at Georgetown, and he has studied New Apostolic Reformation really closely. He wrote a great book about it. He kind of clarified something to me recently about dispensationalism and the ways in which evangelical thinking around Israel has changed just over the last 20 years or so. I don't know how old you are, but if you're roughly my age, you probably remember the Left Behind books, movies, Kirk Cameron.
Dude, I wasn't a Christian when they came out, because I didn't come to the faith until 2008. So there's a whole generation of just Christian stuff I missed, which it sounds like I was better for.
Yeah, I mean, the Left Behind stuff, that it was this wildly popular series of books that was then turned into a movie starring Kirk Cameron. And the idea was that the rapture was going to happen, right? That you couldn't really do anything about it. It would just sort of happen, and that, Christians would be raptured up to heaven and everybody else would be left behind. And this was a kind of way of thinking about things where humans didn't really have a lot of control over the end of the world, right? Like this term eschatology, which means thinking about end times. It just was something that was sort of foretold and would play out. Over the last 20 years, with the rise of this charismatic movement, this global charismatic movement, there's been kind of a move toward thinking that Christians are capable of moving things along a little bit, of helping to bring about this end times scenario of choice. So, I promise I'll get to Iran and all of this in a moment, but you see these various efforts by people to, kind of do the stuff that is described in the Bible. A really salient example of this is, and I wrote about this in my Christian Zionism piece that I wrote last year, but there's this guy, this very wealthy businessman in Texas, Byron Stinson, and he decided that he was going to take it upon himself to fulfill this one part of the prophecy in the Bible where there's supposed to be a perfectly unblemished red heifer that is brought to Israel. I think we talked about this last time.
Yeah. I think I made a clip out of it because I was like, this is kind of gold. I talk about this all the time because it's just, there is no more perfect illustration of this idea that, you Christian, you can bring about the end times. So, he brought, basically, long story short, I've, described this before. I won't go into detail again, but this is a guy who is a, regular businessman and very wealthy businessman in Texas who made it happen. Like, he got all of these unblemished red heifers and transported them to Israel. And, that was kind of like, check that off the list of stuff that has to happen before Jesus comes back. So all of this to say, just real fast before you do that, I wanted to show you something because I bought this book years ago, and it's called "How to Profit from the Coming Rapture." And I think I bought it right before one of those like end time prophecies that was kind of making its rounds. I was like, you know what? Like, if this is it, I'm going to at least try to make a dime off this.
Sure.
So,
who wouldn't?
Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Did it have any good advice?
You know what? What's funny? I haven't even read it. I just bought it for the cover. It's probably really good, I bet, And
I bet. I'm so curious now. Yeah, so, this idea that you can, move things along, Iran plays into this because to a lot of these charismatic Christians, they believe that Iran plays a central role in this kind of final battle between good and evil. That this, a war with Iran is described in the Bible, and there's, the notion of a demon that is called the Prince of Persia, Persia being an ancient biblical times name for Iran, and that it's also part of this battle of Gog and Magog that was also a part of, biblical prophecy. So there's a way in which Christians have really been hoping for a kind of a conflagration in Iran to happen. And they interpret this as kind of as a good thing because it means we're that much closer to the return of the Messiah.
Who are like the people, I guess, like the most influential people that are kind of either pushing this, funding any of this Christian Zionism stuff, and what's your sense on its impact?
Well, we have kind of a few groups of people, right? And, I'll caveat all of this by saying that it's very hard to figure out who the most influential people are financially, because as you know, and as your listeners know, churches are not required to disclose their finances. So a lot of the actual monetary donations to pro-Israel causes are shrouded in secrecy. However, there are a few really influential nonprofit groups. One of those I wrote about, it's called International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. That is a group that is, the head of it is an Orthodox Jew, but 92% of its donations come from American evangelical Christians. Then there's Christians United for Israel, that's Pastor John Hagee's group, 10 million members, hugely influential. And then you have these kind of individual pastors who are mostly making a name for themselves on social media. Pastors, and I would say other Christian influencers. One of them is Lance Wallnau. He's another businessman from Texas, and he's kind of a leading voice, leading influencer in the New Apostolic Reformation. And then you have Sean Foyt. He's actually a Christian musician, and he has been leading a bunch of prayer rallies on the state capitol steps. So he goes around to different state capitals and has these rallies, and he calls them, I think, let us worship, let us pray, let us worship, I think. And these are folks who have been, very vocal in their kind of celebration of this action in Iran. You also have folks who are politically influential. And I would say, this is probably for our readers at Mother Jones, the most important thing to be paying attention to. You have folks like Mike Huckabee and Mike Johnson, who are both Christian Zionists. They are, self-proclaimed Christian Zionists. They've been part of this movement for a long time. And, these are folks who are very close to Trump and who are very kind of hawkish on action in Iran. You have Pete Hegseth, who's a really interesting character because he comes from this same movement. He comes from Christian Zionism. But as of a few years ago, he became more involved with this Reformed movement. He's a follower of Doug Wilson in Moscow, Idaho. So, if you look at what he's been saying, he definitely talks a lot about the political justifications for attacking Iran, but he's not framing it in terms of theology or biblical prophecy or anything anymore. And I'll mention one more person who I think it's important to keep an eye on. Paula White-Cain is Trump's spiritual advisor, or one of them. She's probably the most influential of them. And she is a Christian Zionist. And there's, you can find many, many clips of her, talking about her ideas, her beliefs around Christian Zionism. And she has also been, a proponent of this action in Iran as well.
I mean, it's like with this like network of people that believe our partnership with Israel and our war against Iran is so holy. I mean, it doesn't really, like, it wouldn't be hard to think that there are factions of our government that really do think that this is like a religious war. And when we had the opportunity to speak with Mikey Weinstein recently from the, I forgot this organization. It's a military religious freedom organization. He claimed that he had a bunch of people, submit, whistleblower things about things that the government was saying. I don't know. I'm not a journalist, so I'm not going to necessarily claim whether or not, those statements are true or not. But it does seem as if, like, like it wouldn't be, nobody would be surprised if some journalists got their hand on these statements and were like, yep, that tracks. I'd love to kind of maybe, you don't necessarily have to opine about the Mikey Weinstein thing, but just what's your larger sense of, sort of Christian nationalism within kind of our government?
I mean, I try to keep, what I write about to stuff that you can document, so I definitely know. I've seen clips of Mike Johnson, Mike Huckabee talking about their belief in Christian Zionism. Pete Hegseth from a few years back, yes. In terms of, whether or not that's going on, within the military, with individual commanders doing this, I have not personally seen evidence, so I don't feel like I can write about it. But, I do know that more than half, according to some polls that I reviewed for the actually a radio show that I recently was working on, more than half of American Christians do hold these charismatic beliefs, and Christian Zionism is one of them. So, just statistically speaking, it wouldn't be surprising if some of the commanders in the U.S. military did hold these beliefs.
And, I read an article, probably it was a couple months ago, that talked about FARA, like the Foreign Agent Registration Act, and Christian Zionism, where if my memory serves correctly, I mean, nothing good has ever come out of me remembering something. Like it talked about organizations that were having to register under FARA because they were helping push Israel's message about the war in Gaza. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with this report or not, but it seems to sort of like it makes sense because a lot of our churches are closely tied to Israel. So any messages about Israel, I think would probably land on very sympathetic ears. Back when I used to attend an Assemblies of God church, I think we even had an Israel flag, like in our church. So when you mentioned earlier, I think John Hagee was the name of the person who has like this 10 million member church. I mean, like, are you seeing kind of this influence, like, reach like the pews? Because I mean, having a congregation that large, obviously probably decentralized and all over the place, but still, like, that's a lot of power to move people to, vote or whatever.
Yeah. So I think a few things. One, the 10 million number, as far as I can tell, they're counting. I mean, he does have like a really big congregation in Texas, but they're counting like people who sign up for their emails. So membership is a loose term, but nevertheless, this really is a very mainstream part of charismatic evangelical Christianity. And, you mentioned the Israel flags. I've done a lot of reporting at charismatic megachurches. Israel flags, definitely, but also, some of the kind of accoutrement of Judaism, like people blowing shofars, people wearing Jewish prayer shawls, Stars of David. This is a huge deal in this community. And, I don't, again, it's really hard because churches are not required to disclose their finances to quantify it. But it is my sense from the reporting that I've done, from the polls that I've read, that this is widespread, that this is influencing people to vote, especially because of the way in which the Johnson Amendment was recently kind of revised, and now pastors are allowed to endorse candidates from the pulpit. So that's a big change. I mean, churches are not going to be losing their tax-exempt status for endorsing candidates. And a lot of pastors have been waiting for that to happen for a long time.
Yeah. And I think the Johnson Amendment thing, if I recall, it was like a national religious broadcasters suit. It was kind of weird because like the government like sided kind of like with them. and I don't know if they, it wasn't like a ruling or an opinion. It was some other weird odd thing. I remember talking to Amanda Tyler about it, but yeah, you're right. Like if it does ultimately become overruled, then that's going to be terrible, I think, for churches and politics, to be honest. But, I want to quote something that you put in your article. So you wrote, Matt Bodie, a religious scholar at the University of North Georgia and the author of a new book on Christian nationalism, The Seven Mountains Mandate, which is good, by the way, sees Operation Epic Fury as an indication that these leaders are now in a position not only to espouse these views, but actually to attempt to accomplish them. The Trump administration and its allies, he says, are trying to fulfill. So I'm like, are you seeing anything outside of us just, bombing Iran? that is like, are there additional boxes to check? Like, are there any more red heifers to buy?
Well, I think one of the most significant things for Christian Zionists that has happened politically over the last decade or so was moving the U.S. Embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. That was seen as an action that was fulfilling biblical prophecy, and that was, bringing us closer to this time of rebuilding the third temple and, all of the rest of the things that will usher in the end times.
Yeah. Are there specific like Bible verses or scripture that you are seeing, Christian Zionists use quite used more than say others?
Yeah, I mean, the Prince of Persia thing, I've seen that a lot. And that's, the idea is that there's this demon and he is associated with Persia or ancient Iran. So, in the current conflict, people are seeing, the rearing the head of the demon or whatever. But also, there a lot of the folks whose social media accounts I was following in the days after the first bombs fell were talking about the significance of the fact that we and Israel attacked Iran a few days, I think it was like 3 days before the beginning of the Jewish holiday of Purim. And Purim actually celebrates the victory of this queen, Jewish queen, Queen Esther, against an evil king. And the whole thing takes place it's a battle against Persia. And so, I think that timing, it was almost certainly coincidental, but there's a lot of meaning being read into that.
Yeah. So when people see, Christian Zionists, you see somebody like a Mike Huckabee or Mike Johnson, and you see pastors and other sort of faith leaders in the community become very vocal and political about this war. Like, is that like a church-state separation thing, or is that sort of like church-state adjacent?
Are you saying in the sense of like, do you think that they're overly mixing faith and politics?
Yeah.
I mean, in my mind, I don't know. I'm just a journalist, so I just describe these things. I'm not supposed to opine on them. But it does seem like if you're saying, as some of these folks have, that that Israel has a right to all of this land because of what was foretold in the Bible. If you're bringing the Bible into your politics like that, it seems like a little bit of a crossing of a line. I don't know.
Yeah. It is, and it was an odd question. So, like, ask a bad question and get a bad answer, right? And
sorry, I didn't mean to give a bad answer.
But I asked it because, I mean, like, in the conversations I have with friends, liberal and Republican, I mean, I think the church-state separation thing is sort of a point of confusion for a lot of people, where, you see somebody pray in public, they're like, oh, that's Christian nationalism, and I'm like, that's not really Christian nationalism, but it's like people are sort of triggered to react to things and just, see religion, see politics, and then just assume kind of the worst or the best, depending on who you are. But in this regard, like, is it really bad that politicians and faith leaders are interpreting this, like, geopolitical conflict, through a prophetic, or like some sort of apocalyptic lens? Like, I don't know. I mean, is that bad? I mean, it's probably bad if you're not a believer, but it's probably good if you are a believer. Like, what do you think?
Well, I mean, I don't know if I'm in the position to judge whether it's good or bad, but it definitely does have enormous real world consequences, right? Like, if, I'm not saying that this is like the only reason that we decided to bomb Iran, but even if it was a small part of it, there are people who are dead in Iran. There are American service members who have died. These are huge, consequential decisions that are being made, at least in part because of somebody's faith beliefs. Mm-hmm. It seems like, I agree, like, the whole point of separation of church and state, from how I understand it, is that everybody is free to practice their own religion, not that politicians are allowed to use their own faith to inform their policy decisions, Yeah,
definitely. Well, I guess if you could have readers take away one thing from your work on Christian Zionism, like, what would that one thing be?
I think, there's a perception that this is a fringe movement, that it's like a few religious fanatics that, believe this crazy stuff. And I think in a way that's true. Like, I don't think every single person who attends, a charismatic church is out there cheering for the bombing of Iran. On the other hand, this movement is huge, and the importance of Israel to the charismatic movement really cannot be overstated. It is an incredibly important theme in this movement. And, I think that's the reason that I pay attention to it. I think it's important.
Yeah. Oh, I just have one more question. Do you think this will be a political issue in the midterms?
I think so. I mean, like, for the reasons that we were talking about, if folks are going to church and having their views formed by pastors who are influenced by this ideology, I don't see why it wouldn't. Will it be important enough to actually move the needle on some races? I don't know, but I do think it will be a factor. Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm thinking, November's still a ways away, but if you have already two factions within kind of the MAGA wing of the party that are kind of on opposite sides of the issue, it's like, how many more fractures like do you need? I mean, first it's like the Epstein files, and then it's like, the Iran thing. Like, it seems like that there are lots of small fractures, lots of them that are going to eventually create a weak point.
Well, absolutely, and I think the most recent polling suggests that younger charismatic evangelicals are not as convinced that their elders' prevailing sentiments about Israel are the truth. Like, the younger evangelicals are more likely to be kind of anti-interventionist, I guess. So that will be an interesting thing to watch too, whether their voices, whether there are enough of them yet to really make a difference, I don't know. But yeah, it will be really interesting to see.
Well, awesome. Well, Kiera, thanks again for stopping by Faith and Politics. Really glad to have you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. And we will make sure we put all the links to your article and everything in the show notes. And to our audience, again, thank you so much for stopping by. And as always, keep your conversations not right or left, but up. We'll see you next time. Take care.